Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of March 1st. We are still operating under the governor's special orders for remote meetings. All of our votes will need to be done by roll call vote. To confirm our quorum, we will do attendance, starting with Denny.
Here. Sorry.
Josette.
Here.
Allie.
Here.
Andrew.
Here.
Steve.
Here.
Susan.
Here.
Jeff.
Here.
Kathleen.
Here.
Lucy.
Here.
Brian.
Here.
Doug.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
Lisa.
Here.
And myself. We have 14-0-0 for attendance. Thank you, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to make a couple comments real quick. Kathleen has reached out to me. She does this every year at this time. She gets a paycheck through the school department as part of a state grant program. So she will be part of the deliberations, but she's going to abstain from voting on the school budget. Okay. And does anybody else have a conflict that they need to address? Anybody who has a relative who's an employee of the school department that we need to be aware of? Don't think so. Okay, thank you. Bridget, do you want to start off, or Nancy?
Sure, I can start. Mark, can you allow me to share my screen? I think you're
Yeah, Patrick, can you set that up for?
Yeah, it should be all set, Bridget.
Okay.
Oh, great, thanks. All right, let me just move you guys to the side so I can see what I'm doing. So thanks. So as you can see, before we get started, this image is quite different from the images you saw last year at this time when presenting our proposed budget. So what we're going to do tonight is just provide a general overview of how the FY20 ended and the impact of what happened in FY21 and the proposed FY22 budget. We'll review the FTE personnel report you received and also the comprehensive budget sheet. You may have additional questions and we're hoping to get them answered, but if we can't answer them all tonight, we're happy to come back. We'll also pause periodically during the presentation. So for example, we'll pause after the FY21 overview to see if there's a need for any clarification or to answer any questions. And then we'll pause again after the FY22 and before moving into the FTE report in the comprehensive budget. So the budget that we'll present to you this evening will hopefully take our students beyond what has been accomplished during the most challenging time of COVID education. We're tremendously proud of the work that was and is necessary to support both remote and in-person learning, while at the same time managing the protocols and contact tracing to mitigate risk and to maximize the safety of our students and our staff. Despite the many challenges, with the exception of the preschool way back in early September, all of our buildings have remained open since September 14th. I think we were talking about this the other day, that we were one of, if not the first school district to open our doors. We were also able to bring back kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2 to 4 days a week, as well as many other students across the district, and we continue to do so on a weekly basis. But before we address the FY22 budget, we need to start back a year ago when we presented our original FY21 budget to you. You remember at that time, this time last year, we discussed the changing demographics of Walpole students and the staff necessary to fully support their learning. And in order to make sure that we provide equitable opportunities for all of our learners. We had to do this year without the positions, but these positions are even more essential as we plan for the previous needs, as well as the many new ones that now exist. So taking a look at this slide, if you remember at this time last year, the town administrators recommended Walpole Public School budget was $47,901,167. And then after post-COVID related adjustments, the town administrator's new recommendation and town meeting approved the budget as 46,858,876. So note that this reduction was a reduction of approximately 1.4 million. And finally, the school department applied an additional $736,000 from FY20 savings to the FY21 budget for a total of $47,594,867. What this did, it avoided layoffs of approximately 16 critically needed staff members. However, it was accomplished with one-time money, which now affects our FY22 budget. The next couple of slides will show a deeper dive. This is just an overview, but a deeper dive into FY21 and FY22 budgets. It should be noted, though, that after the budgets were set in FY21, revenue significantly exceeded the budgeted amount. And although Walpole Public School did not seek we did not seek to access any additional revenue mid-year, we operated on the base of 47,594,876. So taking a look at this slide, if you look at first the column on the right, those were the positions of the last years at school committees and administrative priorities. So that was our leadership counselor, staff, and school committee voted on those recommended priorities. We felt that these were the positions that would best meet the most urgent and changing needs of our student population. If you look at the left-hand column, that represents the school committee FY21 budget request, and that represented an increase of 4.8%. And that was voted on by school committee on January 31st. So if you take a look at the base budget of FY20, the increase of approximately 2.2 million, school committee voted on a budget of 48,302,835. And that was on January 31st of last year. Jim Johnson, town administrator, came in at a 3.92% increase, and that was on February 27th, and that left a gap of 401. That was pre-COVID. Then you can see bottom dropped, and after COVID hit, the budget was changed to a 1.7% increase in May. Wasn't the original number of 3.92. So what did that do? That wiped out all of our positions on the right-hand column, and it left us with the deficit. So again, if you look, you have the FY21 budget. Town administrator comes in May because of COVID, leaves us with a $1.4 million deficit, wipes out all of our positions, and leaves us with a deficit of $923,959. So what Mike will do is even dig deeper into this 923,959 to explain how the district was able to cover the shortfall to level fund.
So good evening, everyone. This is a worksheet that I've been using for much of the FY21 and even as we put together the FY22 budget. As you notice on the top, there's the FY20 budget of $46,092,835, which includes Jim Johnson's addition of $766,041. And again, as Bridget mentioned, on May 21st is when we got that adjustment. And that gives us a total budget of $46,858,876. I just want to make a couple of comments about the FY20 budget. And, you know, in the context of last year and what we were going through, an adjustment in May would be really unusual. But in the context of last year, it was exceptional in that Jim was able to commit. Although it was a lower amount than we had hoped for and could work with, it was still a commitment to a budget that we could then build from. So I just want to read a couple of bullet points related to the FY20 budget. In FY20, DESC, Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, required all school districts to continue paying vendors such as special education private schools, PT and OT services, yellow bus vendors, special education vendors, and really not much of an exception there for not paying individual vendors. Some of the contracts we were able to reduce and reflect the reality of the services, some not so much, and we just had to pay them the full amount anyway. The school department had to furlough 116 individuals that had no way of doing their jobs in the FY20 COVID environment. This was not an easy decision based on the uncertainty of the impact of unemployment and the cost to the town. The town is hopeful that they will recoup some of it, if not all of the costs for these layoffs through the CARES Act funding, part of COVID relief, making this the right choice, the right fiscal choice. Additionally, individuals who were furloughed in all cases made more money being unemployed due to the extra $600 payments related to COVID relief and unemployment. And actually, at one point, as we were starting to bring these individuals back, we were hoping they would come back because they were actually making more than what they would be paid working for us. So that's just kind of an outline of what we were dealing with in FY20 as we closed out the fiscal year. So given the number that Jim gave us for FY21, I wanted to go down and talk about some of the variables that were important. We had mandates of the Medicaid grant decrease, and we presented some of this to you guys last year before the situation happened, which was $315,000 we had to cover. FY20 unbudgeted positions were the $253,544. Those are positions we had to add in our FY20 budget, but needed to account for in the 21 budget. Special education tuition increase. We had tuition increases last year that totaled $221,456. We did what we could within special ed's budget, but we were still left with that remainder. This year, you'll hear a more positive outcome fiscally with the FY22 budget. But that left the total mandates of $790,000 outside of what we usually have to address in our budget. When you add in the contractual obligations of the $900,000, collective bargaining and all increases, COLA, steps, lanes, all that, you wind up with a budget deficit of $923,959. And Bridget mentioned that on the prior slide. That's where we had to figure out what we could do, because if we didn't figure it out, it was going to be layoffs in the middle of a pandemic and coming into a situation where we needed more services, but we would have to do it with 16 less people, which just was not going to work. So let me talk about the two different categories of funding that we were able to cobble together as one-time budget offsets. So these are monies that were from savings, from one-time underpaying on contracts that we were able to renegotiate, like grant relief that was only one time. So the personnel carryover money was $285,000. That was savings within the personnel budget, would not repeat itself. It was one-time savings. The FY20 goods and services, as soon as I had heard about this situation, as soon as it developed, we talked to the school committee, we talked to the superintendent, obviously, and agreed to freeze all goods and service spending that we could. So a lot of that was principals, budgets, and things of that sort that were, I guess, optional at that point. That was $351,959. In addition, we got a one-time CARES Relief Act early on in the pandemic, and you'll hear more about COVID relief funding as it evolved. But at this point, there was $100,000 we were aware of, and we could offset that one time, using that one-time money. So our one-time offsets to fill the gap of the $923,959 for $736,959. So again, one-time money. So what were we able to solve permanently and not have to address this year in this budget were the revised deficit offsets were $187,000. That was the remaining to get to 923. So what did we do permanently? We reduced the special ed goods and service budget $60,000. John Quilly was able to, in May, commit to sending money over to our personnel budget to help reduce that gap. We were also able to use grant surplus. Sometimes in our grants, we will have a surplus for a variety of reasons, and we're able to scrape that off of the grants to cover that $35,000. In addition to that, we had 2 positions that we were able to eliminate. One was a retired and unfilled position. That was at the high school ELA teacher that still has not been replaced at this point. And then we added in $27,000 for a high school ESP position that was cut as well. And that made up the final $92,000 to get us to a deficit of, at that point for FY21, of $0. At this point, I wanted to pause for a moment and see if there were any questions. I know it's a lot to absorb, but I'd be happy to answer any questions before moving on to FY22.
Questions, anyone? I don't see anybody with hands up in the chat, but if you want to, oh, Andrew's in. Okay.
Hi, could you speak a bit about the contractual offsets, the 900,000, the contractual obligations that added to your fiscal year 21 budget challenge? And just, was that unforeseen? Could you just explain that?
So that is our what we would traditionally call collective bargaining. I don't like to call it that because it's beyond collective bargaining, but the lion's share of that $900,000 is collective bargaining, and that's composed of COLAs, steps, and in the case of the WTA teachers contract, that's also added in lane changes. So those are obligations that we have to fulfill each year. It also includes individuals that are non-union members who get a COLA, and in some cases steps that are linked to collective bargaining, but not direct. They're not in the collective bargaining agreement. So it's really all of our cost of doing business personnel-wise.
Great. Hey, thank you. And just to refresh my memory, where are we in the contract timeline in terms of collective bargaining? When is the contract up? And I forgot.
So we will be negotiating the teacher's contract next year. We're in our final year right now of that. Actually, next year will be the final year. We'll negotiate it at that point.
Great. Hey, thank you, Mike. So one way to think about this is last year, given the budget tightness that you had to work around, the additional revenue you were given beyond just level funding from fiscal year 20, the additional revenue wasn't even enough to meet your contractual obligations.
That's correct. And we had conversations with Jim at length about this and realized very soon on, Andrew, that that $766,000 wasn't going to do it. You know, we can't just not pay people for, you know, collective bargaining obligations we have. So you are correct with that. Yes.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
Mark, I have one question.
Yep, go ahead.
At the end of the school year, well, let me ask you this: does the school department maintain its own reserves or savings?
Yes. They do not turn anything back to the municipal free cash. They whatever they scrimp and save stays with them. It's been appropriated to them. They've collected the grants. It's theirs to manage. Yes.
And what would be the balance of that right now?
Bridget, I think that's yours, or Mike.
So what do you mean by the balance? It's not a traditional reserve account. You mean, are we running a surplus at this point in the fiscal year?
Right. What I'm wondering is, do you have like a savings where you've got money put aside that you can use if you need to?
No, we don't. I mean, we basically, I can either go to our revolving accounts if we have any surplus there, and I could pay staff from there that were budgeted in the original operating budget. That takes some of that fiscal burden away. But we do not have a traditional savings or buffer account. So I have to be very careful about how I manage this fiscal situation. And that's why in some cases in the past, we've come to you guys for help because we don't have the resources to access a reserve account.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on the current year? Actually, do you see any issues with the current year of maybe coming up short between now and the end of the fiscal year?
We have a fair amount of issues this year, I think, but you know, as far as covering deficits, I don't see anything at this point. And when I go over the COVID relief, I think you guys will get the magnitude of what's going on right now within our budget and every other budget within Massachusetts and the United States. So I don't see it. If I had at this point, I would have let you know. I would have obviously let the school committee know. We would have reached out to you guys. So I feel that we're able to manage it within our means, and we will be okay with that.
Mike, you want me to go to the next slide?
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about FY22 for a moment, and I'll pause after this slide as well. So at the top of this chart is the FY21 base budget, the 46,858,876. Based on my prior worksheet that you just saw, we have a one-time funds gap of 736,000. So in other words, just to elaborate a little bit on the 736, we have personnel obligations specifically that were were not built into the 21 budget. We paid for them from one-time money because we didn't have a choice. But now going into FY22, we need to cover that gap. And it really needs to be covered before any money can be allocated to FY22. So it is a top priority. That's why it sits at the top of this list, that 736. So if you add the 736 to our original base budget for FY21, you come up with the adjusted budget of 47,594,876. So once we're able to fill the gap of the 736, we then have to address this year's collective bargaining total, which is the $1,456,000. And that is made up of what we talked about prior to this conversation about the collective bargaining, the contracts, all related personnel services within our budget. The good news that I referenced earlier is that John Quealy and his group in special ed were able to reduce their goods and service budget to help us with the problem we have this year, because it is a substantial one, to offset the use 223,936 to reduce their budget. And the fair or most of that offset is made up of tuitions. This was tuition reductions. And I guess as years fluctuate, I've come to you guys in the administration a lot of times with increases to special ed tuitions. And that just seemed to be the trend for many years in Walpole. Well, the trend has, at least for this year, reversed somewhat. And that's where we got the reduction of the 223,936. As Superintendent Goff mentioned, we have the new positions this year of 530,000 that she's going to go over on the next slide, I believe, which gives us an FY22 needs-based budget increase of $2,498,064. So as far as FY22 goes, it's a 5.3% increase to $49,356,940. which is the school committee's voted budget. And then that's offset against the town administrator's increase this year of $49,034,884. The reason for the note in red to the right was after I had done these slides and worked with the superintendent to put together the slide presentation, Jim had sent out his notes to you guys actually this evening, and we noticed that there was a slight change in his appropriated number, which was favorable for us by about $14,000. So that's the actual adjusted number. We just wanted to put it in there to avoid any confusion. So our $322,000 deficit that we're facing at this moment is actually $308,135.
So looking at our positions, you'll see that this looks extremely familiar because it's basically verbatim of the positions that we requested last year. So I just want to go through them again and just remind you of these positions, what they are, and the rationale for it. You can see that the ESOL stands for English as a Second Language, and that actually shows up twice on this. Looking at the first one, the ESOL teacher, that's a district-wide. This really will provide equity across the district. Currently, right now, not every school has an ESOL educator, and it's important to address the changes to our student population and invest in both the delivery models and the resources in order to effectively meet the needs of our diverse learners. As I mentioned last year, I believe October 2020, 3.5% of our student population is classified as English learners, compared to 2.7% 4 years ago. And today, 10.5% of our students' first language is not English. And I think I included it here from last year. So this will be updated once we get the March the March Sims goes in. But you can just see, the number of languages that are spoken. The majority is, Spanish, Portuguese, Spanish, and Arabic. But it's really important that we continue to address these needs for our English language learners. We have over about approximately 11%, about 420 students whose first language is not English. In addition to this, the Look Act was enacted, I think, over a year and a half ago. And that really requires us to have increased input with our parents and guardians. We established an English learner pact, because once you have over 100 students, that is a requirement, and rightfully so. The department has also required stringent benchmarks for English learners, guidelines to support districts in identifying our learners who don't meet these benchmarks. And it really requires the districts to adopt procedures to identify those who don't meet the benchmarks, and then also to establish certain processes to make sure that they meet them. There's been an increase in data reporting that expands districts to submit to the Department of Education. We also have a seal of biliteracy, where it directs us to establish a seal of biliteracy, which is a great program to students who meet the same criteria in attaining high levels of proficiency in English and in another language. And also, the Look Act expands the student census requirement for districts to include English learners who are in pre-kindergarten. So that's our pre-K. You can also see, and I'll go back to health and wellness, but there's an ESP, ESOL teacher, that's a support professional. That's why you'll see the amount is less. But the number of students in our ESOL program at the high school has risen, currently at 29, with now an additional 18 in what we call our FEL category. That's former English learners. And we are still responsible for tracking and assisting those students, rightfully so. What that would do is it allows us to increase our classes to 3, one at each level, and also not only to assist in the classroom, but to provide support in our gen ed classrooms to make sure that they're able to stay up with the curriculum. Our health and wellness teacher, as you see, that's on there, that was on there last year. The goal is we need to offer specialized classes to integrate upper level health component to our juniors and seniors. This ties directly in to social emotional learning and also our strategic plan. This would enable all students at the high school to take health and wellness, that includes our phys ed too, all 4 years, and to make sure that we are meeting the Mass Core requirement, which we are not at this point. Our 2 elementary counselors, 2.0, currently, I remember that we have 1.5 counselors per building. This would enable 2 elementary counselors at each of the schools. And I just want to read something, and I did this last year, from a counselor in a program from another district in another state, who stated, when you invest in school counselors, you're not investing in students' academic achievement, mental health, and college and career readiness. It's an investment in the entire school, in families and whole communities. Some districts have seen an increase in attendance and a decrease in suspensions when they see an increase in their counseling staff. Counselors now would have more time to visit classrooms and tend to all students, not just those who are undergoing crises. Counselors identify students with specific problems, offer short-term assistance work with staff, students, and their families, and then pair students with the correct support professionals, such as psychologists or therapists, who can address deeper issues. That's on top of their regular duties, which include academic advising, educating school staff, and students about bullying, vaping, social media, monitoring the overall climate, and addressing discipline issues and handling other crises. I don't think anyone can dispute during the pandemic our increase in mental health needs, and that's been even greater, and we need to continue to address that. Our 1.0 middle school special education chair, our middle school chair has consistently had the highest caseload in the district, oftentimes by a wide margin. Given this, the chair is involved in many transitions. With the exception of preschool, this single person is involved with every building in our district. Building-based team chair at each middle school will allow for a wider range of tasks, most importantly, being a resource for the gen ed and special education teachers for interventions. This will also allow for staff coaching, which is something that will be extremely meaningful. This person functions as a liaison to outside agencies, will determine progress monitoring tools for staff that measure student growth resulting from the interventions, analyzing data and next steps for targeted students, and then being able to model for teachers of how to implement research-based interventions to provide access and success for all. The middle school transition coach is very similar to our high school transition coach. So would work with students returning from long or short-term absences, regardless of the program, due to physical, emotional, or medical reasons. The transition coach also assists students and their families with the process of re-entry and engagement within the school community, offering academic support, overseeing tutoring services, and facilitating appropriate counseling. So this is a position that would have to be shared between the middle schools. The .4 computer science teacher that was on there last year, we currently have a .6 in our tech department, but we want to increase that to a 1.0. The goal is to offer additional sections in computer science and then also personal finance. It's probably one of the most sought after courses in that department, and students and families have reported that they wish all students would have the opportunity to take a personal finance course, and I could not agree more. And then finally, our full day K reduction. This will continue our commitment to full day free K eventually to provide equitable access for all of our students. And Mike, if I'm correct, I think I mentioned before, it would reduce the tuition from $1,800 to $1,350. And that was part of a 7-year plan commitment to our community.
Can we jump in with a few questions? I saw some hands come up.
Yes.
Alrighty, let's start with Allie and then Denny.
Hello, thank you for all this information. It was great to have the printout too. A few comments I have to make. I'm going to ask some questions, and then I kind of wanted to ask if you could prioritize these budget requests for next year. I know we kind of said what are the top 3 that really you feel are most necessary, although I do have a comment on a few of them. Reduction of full day kindergarten tuition. That is great to hear that it's back on. I was part of the kindergarten task force for the superintendent years ago. We did a lot of work. I could go on and on and on about how important it is for early childhood and the full day kindergarten, but it was a very thought out plan we had 7 years ago when we put this forward, and many of our districts have continued to move forward on this, and WAPL is in the minority of still charging a tuition based for full day kindergarten. So little sidebar, middle school chair. I just kind of wanted to give some feedback just from personal experience too. The middle school chair, that person, as Bridget said, deals with every single building almost in school in our town. And I will say it is one of the most difficult jobs as a parent of a child of special needs that went through the WAPL system. The transition for parents from elementary to middle school is tremendous. The transition from parents from middle school to high school is tremendous. You cannot even imagine our special education students and the changes in the programs that we have. We've developed great programs, which is why our special education was able to save costs, and we save costs over and over again throughout the district by having these programs, these individual programs in all of our schools. but that chair, I could see that is definitely a need. It's a hard transition for parents, for teachers, and there's a lot that goes into it because each student's needs are so unique. And then I just had a question about the turnover for the transitional coach that you have. I kind of want to ask, I turnover, I don't mean it in that way, but as students are having kind of mental health crisis and having to do programs at home or having to need breaks, I could see that a transitional coach was a need. How successful have we been in getting these students back into school? And that may not be a number that you have, but I'd be interesting to know that as I feel more kids are having to do alternative education online, and not even in the sense of the COVID or the remote, but just with mental health crises and other things going on.
Yeah, that's a great question, Elle. And then I know that John and Bill are on here too, and feel free to jump in, guys. But, if you talk about the transition coach at the high school, it's been successful, not only in returning students, but it's getting them back so they're not so far behind. I mean, even students who have concussions, right, and need that support. If they don't have that support, then they come back and they get further and further behind. And then that's when you have issues like dropout that can exist. So it's not only the concussions, but also, yes, the mental health, being able to have the connection, creating bonds with the students and with the families to keep these students in district, and then also to make sure that they're not falling further and further behind. John and Bill, did I miss anything?
I think not only that, Dr. Goff, keeping students in district, but keeping students from not being re-hospitalized. Lots of times students will come out of the hospital, come into school, and if the circumstances don't change, then that student is likely going to end up in the hospital again. This is a barrier, hopefully, to having that happen. So I would agree. I think it's an important position.
And lastly, I remember one of the questions that I had. I have a list, so they're from different areas. Have you had any feedback from the elementary school teachers? Having 2 elementary students myself, I'm talking more about the social emotional and the counseling and that. Have you had feedback from our elementary schools of the impact of our students this year and what is being required of them? I would imagine it's a significant increase of students that are having difficulty.
Phil, do you want to talk about the survey and what staff in our social emotional team?
Sure. I don't have the survey directly in front of me, so I apologize, Ali. I won't be able to give you strict numbers. I could pull it up while the meeting continues, but in comparison from the fall to the winter survey from minimally parents, the area of continued or increased need was in the area of social emotional learning. And that is also, to answer your question more directly, reflected in our teachers' responses. And as you're probably well aware, in reflection of our national response around the reduction in
of meeting the needs that everybody had to have met. And it definitely was a christening for you, superintendent, coming in for your first year. You got hit with everything all at once. But the attendance, have you been able to get a better hand at it to make sure that everybody who should be attending the classes were? And how do you deal with that and follow up on it to make sure that it doesn't become a pattern?
All right, so we'll start with the prioritize for positions. It's hard to prioritize them. We prioritize them right now, as you see them. I think that, and I think Nancy and Bill, feel free to speak to this. Like, it was something that if we didn't have the COVID and we looked at that, the one-time money that came in and not going for it, or, earlier, that we would have been able to get some of these positions last year. If you look at what our gap was, so to speak. But we just feel like that these are positions that are essential to meet the needs of all of our learners. But Nancy, before I go, because I know you wanted to say, before I go to the next question, did you want to comment?
Yeah, when it comes to prioritizing, as a committee, we have not done that yet. So, that's the honest answer. And the reason we haven't done it is for a couple of reasons. One is because based on available revenue, we're fairly close to being able to get these positions. But secondly, I think that when we sort of look back on the past year, in some ways, I wish we had asked for a bump in our budget to cover the one-time money once we realized that both state aid and new growth revenue had come in higher than it did. Because then if we had addressed that in the fall, we would only be asking for a 3.6% increase, which feels much more reasonable.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like the right thing to do at the time because everybody was working so hard to be cooperative with so many unknowns still in front of us. But I look at this budget request as a two-part request. One is that we need to address the one-time money, and then we're looking to, if the town can afford it, to bring the district forward. We know we're going to have an awful lot of needs. A lot of these positions are in the social, emotional, or support areas, but it strengthens our whole district. And we know we may have to prioritize, but we're pretty close to being able to approve a budget with your cooperation and our cooperation that would really meet these needs. So we figured we would prioritize if we needed to during the month of March and even into April. But they're all important.
Yep.
And we just haven't done it yet, I guess is the true answer.
Mike, do you want to take the COVID question? Would you want to
Bridget,
say
I
that?
think I'll defer. Yeah, when we get to it in the agenda, it's a good question, but it's a comprehensive answer.
Yeah, so Joe said Mike's got that.
No
coming
problem.
up. In terms of the remote attendance, DESE mandates, at the beginning of the school year that we have to track attendance, both for in-person and for remote. So it is tracked through our X2 system. If students are attending, there's a process for that. So we do have to follow up and make sure. I think we currently have in our full remote learning program of parents who chose to go full remote, 370 students. So it's a task, but we're doing it. We're doing it, and we need to make sure that, like I said, we're meeting the needs of everybody.
Thank you for the great job you've done.
Susan and Andrew?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question to Dr. Goff. Can you go back to the financial literacy program and tell me how that's working and at what grades and how many students are involved? I'm very interested in that particular area.
Bill's going to look at, are you speaking, Bill? Okay. He'll give you some information.
A while ago about financial.
Yep.
I was going to jump and actually get to the numbers. So
I was going right to X2 too as well.
Okay.
It's going to take me a second. It's primarily, it's related arts course that's primarily taken by juniors and seniors. I want to get the exact numbers for you, and that will take me 1 minute. So I don't know if we want to move to the next question, then I can have the answer when we come back.
Well, while you're looking, let me just say two things. One, I just want to echo my compliments to all of you for getting through this ridiculously difficult time with all kinds of challenges. From everything that I've heard, the district's done a most impressive job. And even though I don't have kids in the system, I still appreciate the fact that you're taking good care of our kids, as always. The other thing I wanted to say was on the subject of financial literacy. This may not be the time, but at some point I'd like to see all school districts actually incorporate this almost as a requirement, because I think that it's important when kids graduate from high school that they understand simple things like what is interest, how does it work, and I think a lot of kids are going off to college without having the faintest idea of how finances work. And it's not just because I'm on the finance committee, but I just have seen a lot of kids get in trouble because they just really don't have the basics. So it's I'm delighted to hear that we're doing something in this area, and I hope that it grows. So maybe that's given you enough time, Mr.
Yeah, and so we have four sections. They're mostly maxed out around 28 to 30 students. Some a little bit less, some a little bit more, not more than 30, excuse me, but some a little bit less than that. Just looking at averages. And so we have 4 total sections that this year is unique with the high school schedule, but that run the course of the year. And one of the goals would be, with that added position, allow us to move some teachers around and offer more of those sections.
And so from what you're saying, I gather there's an interest from the students.
That's one of the highest demands, especially of the elective courses.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
So actually on that topic, so are you looking at taking the current 0.6 person and making them full-time, or adding a 0.4 person so there can be 2 people running the program?
No, it would be increasing to adding it to a 1.0 and then shifting teachers around so we can offer more courses.
Okay, so that person would become full-time and just split the workload. Okay.
And I just clarify, that's an important point that you just made, because one of our issues is hiring at 0.6 that position. So we're not successful getting the candidates or the number of candidates. So making it a 1.0 also draws in more highly qualified candidates. So thank you for asking that question.
Okay, so on that financial literacy, can you just give us like an overview of the curriculum? Because I mean, I took accounting as a major in college. My junior year auditing class, half the kids in the class didn't know how to balance a checkbook. So I'm hoping that they're getting some hands-on, ability so that they could say, I got money in the bank, but it's like you don't because you wrote all these checks.
Yeah, I don't know the details of the course. Like, we could have Mr. Brasini come and speak in detail, but personal finance absolutely includes some things like basic banking and but also some levels of accounting as well. But I don't want to give you a.
That's fine. No, I just wanted to make sure that there are at least some sound basics there so that the kids can get out and understand the value of money and keep track of it for themselves. Alrighty. Andrew.
Hi. So I just want to ask 1 or 2 clarifying questions and then make a statement that maybe we can come back to later. So the first clarifying question is just some math. For fiscal year 2021, it seems that the budget rose 1.7% from this presentation. And then you're asking, you being the school committee, the school administration, are asking for a fiscal year 2022 budget increase of 5.33%. And so compounded over 2 years, that seems to be a 7.12% increase. So about 7.1% increase over 2 years. And so I kind of am doing a thought experiment of, imagine COVID never happened. I know we all wish that were the case. And the school budget increased linearly to over 2 years, hit that 7.1% increase. By my math, it's roughly a 3.5% increase for 2021 and 2022. 3.5%, historically, you can quibble with this, but that seems quite moderate, quite modest. So the point, just stop me if anyone on the school committee and the school administration noticed I did any math wrong. So please stop me if that 3.5% thought experiment is wrong. But I'm doing that math to illustrate that it seems that the schools are really playing catch up, right? For catch up in 2 ways, both in terms of budgets, but also in terms of kids and learning. Catch up for essentially a year of over $1 million of lost budget resources that were sorely needed in the last fiscal year, or the current fiscal year we're going through. That did not materialize because of COVID. So I do this math to illustrate that I think some people will say, wow, the schools are asking for 5.3%, when really it's playing catch up, right? For all the extraordinary improvisation that Mike and Bridget and really the school committee did during this current fiscal year and the last calendar year to date, using one-time money, facing a number of different challenges. So I'm just, the statement I want to make as I ask that clarifying question is, we're playing catch up, and the budget catch up matters, but it almost doesn't matter in my mind as much as the learning catch up. And so my question is, how are you quantifying the potential learning loss and the potential mental health crises that we hear so much about that students are facing? Now, I'm not saying that kids are learning less because of COVID, because I think you've done an extraordinary job with remote learning, with the hybrid model during the last year. But I'm asking you, because of MCAS and the uncertainty around future MCAS, the interruption to last year's MCAS, how can you quantify what learning loss, if any, and I hope not any, has happened? And I ask that not to criticize the school system, but to make the case that your 3.5% budget increases over 2 years are very modest. And given these challenges, that learning loss, we need to invest even more in our schools going forward to play catch up, not just with the budget, but with the kids learning. So how have you been able to quantify what learning loss has happened, if any?
I can start that, and Bill, if you want to jump in after if I miss anything. And I'm glad, Andrew, you talked about, learning loss and not always, also looking at a deficit perspective, right? Because we don't want to always look at everything from a deficit perspective. And, we talked to staff about that, when our students, and we have them, we want to take them from where they are and move them forward. But we also know that sometimes the students will also have gaps. So, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we need to also take a look at COVID, some of the things that we've learned from COVID in order to continue to move the district forward. Second, we don't just rely just on MCAS in terms of our benchmarking. We've been benchmarking all year. We have that's been in our strategic plan. We have worked tirelessly with that. We have a literacy coordinator who has been doing yeoman's work on benchmarking. We have our math coaches that have been working on benchmarking, so we can see where students are, where their gaps are, and then how we can take those assessments and that data in order to implement effective instructional practices in order to close those gaps. It's the same for all of our students, not just our ELs, not just our special education students, but all students are getting these benchmark assessments. Because when you look at MCAS, MCAS, it's an accountability measure. But when you're looking at MCAS, it's at the end of the year. We always say that's like, an autopsy, right? They're gone for the next year. You can get an idea of what the student accomplished and figure out what you need to do to help drive it forward for the following year. But you really want to benchmark them throughout the year so you can see where their gaps are in order to figure out what interventions need to be put in place. So that's what we're doing, and being able to identify those gaps. That's academically, and then also taking a look at surveys from students for social emotional, surveying our parents and the counselors. They keep data. They data track. Our nurses keep track of data of our nursing visits of when students are, and it's not just medical, it's also mental health. Bill, did I miss anything?
No, I was going to summarize that we actually have a lot of built-in benchmark assessments. And I was going to go actually back to a question that Brian Bain brought up earlier about strategic plan, that one of the areas of goals in our strategic plan just 4 years ago was increased benchmark assessments. So you're now seeing the reflection of that strategic plan in place now, all the way up to a piloted 9th grade iReady benchmark assessment that's in place right now, thankfully, because it's another way we can assess how our students are doing in addition to the common formative assessments that are created by our PLC academic teams all throughout the year that Dr. Goff referred to as our walking autopsies. So it's a great question. It's not that one that we take lightly, and data meetings, even in hybrid model, are happening daily among our teams and even at the district level. I'm meeting with math coaches next week to discuss our iReady results. And that will impact the way it has in years past, the way we intervene, the way we address our curriculum, and the way that we might have to spiral or support students next year and this year.
And Andrew, in terms of the personnel, Mike, when we get to the FTE reports, he'll show that. So that kind of explains what you're talking about the 3.5%.
Thank you.
You're all set? Okay. Kathleen, and then Mark.
I've got a couple of things. One, I just threw you, Mark. I was just wondering if I could get, I guess, Mike's opinion of 224,000 tuition reductions in special ed. Does that, to me, that appears like one-time money. And since we just went through a one-time money spending that we need to recover from, does that set us up for the same situation next year? If things return, I know we can't predict, but if things return to normal in terms of special ed tuitions, do you have any misgivings about using that money?
I don't. I'll distinguish that money it's budgeted, is part of our appropriated budget. Those expenses go away, not to return from those particular individuals. What happens next year or years after that, we don't know at this point, but that money built into our budget no longer needs to be allocated to those tuition expenses. And I would distinguish that from one-time money, which usually it's never in your operating budget. It's usually from other sources that are one-time funds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks for that. If you're comfortable, I'm comfortable. My other thing was when we're talking about prioritizing these positions, I'm so sad that these positions didn't make it last year, because I think this year we'd be talking about other positions that would be the priority. So these things were prioritized because they're holdovers from before, but I would imagine, and Dr. Goff, Mark, through you to Dr. Goff, perhaps, maybe you could just comment on other things that you would like to see. I assume a diversity and inclusion position would be right near the top of that, but I appreciate that the positions you have do touch upon diversity. So we're making some steps there, but I just wonder if you could comment on what else is missing from here.
Yeah, we have talked about that, Kathy. I'm glad you mentioned that. And some other things, if you notice the dropout work study prevention position isn't on there this year. And the rationale for that was that, Stephen Imbush felt, and rightfully so, and I agree with him, that that's something that takes a good amount of time to put together. And you just don't want to get something for the sake of the position of getting the position. If you're going to do something, you need to do it right and you need to do it well. So this year we'll be looking to put that together in hopes of possibly getting that for next year. So that kind of goes with Brian's about, looking at that future thinking. We're always looking at our literacy. We have our literacy coach at the elementary school is doing fantastic work. We're always looking at, coaching opportunities for our staff, because we know that when you provide the appropriate training for the staff and the support that they have, that's going to have a direct correlation to student achievement. So that's just a couple that I have.
Thank you.
Mark.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I have a question just on the initial spreadsheet that you gave us. So you have a budget of the 49.3 million. And then we have a total comp budget of the 54.7. And so I guess what I'm wondering is your spending actually 54.7, but you expect all this money in grants and offsets. So the actual budget money you need from the town is the 49?
Mark, you're way ahead of the game. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, you guys are very ambitious in jumping ahead on these. We're going to go over the comprehensive.
Oh,
Mike's
right.
going to go over that. So thanks.
Okay,
I'm glad that
I'll
you
save my
mentioned
comment.
that.
That's a good question.
I do have one question though. So Walpole, and I'm not even going to mention the name, but Walpole's on the agenda of articles is to recognize a holiday in Juneteenth. What I'm wondering is, from the school perspective, I think it's the 19th, and I think this year you end before the school year, well, before the Juneteenth hits. But let's say you're planning out your calendar and the school year goes till June 23rd. Would Juneteenth be like a holiday that the kids wouldn't go to school? I'm talking future years. And is there a financial impact to it?
Yeah, that's something we would discuss with school committee when we set the calendar. But let's say you said anything as a holiday, for example, in this case, or a day off, that's a day off to recognize something. Then what you would do is you would go the extra day. It does not count as a school day. It does not. So you would have to then make sure that you get your 180 days in. So as we had anything, if you look at Thanksgiving, for example, so you're going the following day. So the students would have to go, if they were going to get out on the 21st, they would get out on the 22nd. And teachers still need to make sure that they're working 183 days.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the proposed positions? Okay, let's move into the comprehensive.
Right, so I think Mark is going to talk about the FTE and then go into the comprehensive.
All right, so I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to talk about some struggles we're having. And the reason I want to do that is because it'll make the FTE report a little more understandable. So I wanted to just talk briefly about what we're going to face next year and what we're currently facing right now in some of our businesses, such as school nutrition, extended day, which really are micro businesses within the school budget. So let's talk about school nutrition for a moment. In 2021, 10 days before this school year began, we were told by DESE, do not charge anyone. We're going to reimburse at a rate of X number of dollars per meal. So with 10 days notice, ignore all the revenue that you've used to function and to make your account sustainable, replace it and trust that that'll be equal to the amount that we're going to provide as a state to you in place of that revenue. So we are still trying to figure out how that's going to play out. And so far, so good, knock on wood, but it brings up some other questions. Okay, so what are we supposed to do next year, right? There's been no indication. Is that going to extend another year? Are they going to, they've promised to finish this year out. So will they extend it to next year? We're hearing rumors they might, but maybe they won't. The other thing is, what will it look like when we decide as a school department or a school nutrition program, we're going to start charging you, everyone who was getting their meals for free? Will people line up for the same food that they were getting for free, and how will that whole thing play out? The reason I say that is because I need to properly manage, because Mark, to your point, I don't have a reserve account I can go to if we over anticipate revenue, if we overstaff because we think we're going to need all these people. So I'm just giving you some examples in food services, what we're struggling with right now and going into next year. The extended day program, our enrollments declined by 80%, our offsetting revenue declined by 75 to 80%. We had to lay off all the staff that I talked about in 20 and not hire them back in a lot of cases because we don't have the enrollments. That program was a way for me to offset the cost of many custodians. So as that goes away, so does the ability for me to offset those positions. And there's only one place they can go if they're not in a revolving account, and that's back into the operating budget. And that's why I'm talking about this. The building rental account, another business that we operate within the school department. As you know, building rentals were prohibited outright until around February, where we're able to start getting in some of our Walpole youth basketball and some of those groups that we rent to, who they benefit and we benefit. That's a loss. That was $200,000 in revenue that we collect a year that I'm able to use for building expenses. I don't even pay salaries, just maintain our buildings. It doesn't come from the appropriated budget. And a lot of times it comes from that revolving account that helps supplement our any kind of operating budget that we have for that need. And then finally, the athletics program, right? It's funded in part by participation fees, right? Athletic fees that students pay. It's also supplemented by gate receipts for football games, which never took place but may now. So we've got these seasons that look different than in the past years, and how will that impact? Transportation, can't put full buses of kids to transport to games, so you have to do a very reduced number of riders in those buses. What's that going to look like? What has it looked like? And then parents have stepped up. So you think you're going to be in a certain situation, but then yet parents step up or people make moves that help you, and vice versa. So I just want to kind of portray the challenges in just the revolving accounts that we have dealt with this year and we will continue to deal with next year. And that's the underlying rationale when we get to the FTE report, which I can go over right now if everyone's ready to do that. So I'd like to begin with its title, just so we're clear, the FTE report for the school budget is the first category. So if you're looking at the report, you see that it lists by position type, the administration's first, then your school staff, meaning your teachers and your ESPs and all people of that sort directly related to education, and then our support staff, and then at the bottom are other staff. This is one critical piece, this is all operating budget. This has nothing to do with revolving accounts. This is everything covered solely by the operating budget. So in FY21, you can see the first column on the left. That's the staffing level. So it has the FTE numbers and then the cost of that particular line item. FY22 is right next to it, which was what we're projecting. So if I go down the list, the first one that steps out is line 10 on that report, School Nutrition Director. Why is that a 1.0 increase for the School Nutrition Director? So the School Nutrition Director traditionally has been paid by the revolving account. We use the revenue within that account and we're able to offset her salary. And then down below under line number 29 is the Assistant Director, which is the School Nutrition's Operations Facilitator. Both of those individuals have always been paid out of the nutrition account. I cannot count on that revenue next year. And so when I'm asked to build a budget, I've got to use conservative figures because I don't have a surplus to go to. Actually, my reserve accounts are these revolving accounts in some ways. So that's, again, responsible budgeting. So you see that go up, and that's an expense to the operating budget. Right below, Extended Day Director, 1.0 increase. Can't pay for that out of that account as well. I can't count on that revenue. So basically what I'm saying is there are 7 positions, about half of the 14.35 at the bottom of the sheet increases are just from revolving accounts. The other 7.4 are actually the new positions. So when you look at the bottom line of the school department increases on FTEs, don't assume that those are all new positions. Those aren't all increases. Those are us adapting to this COVID situation and making sure that we do not wind up in a deficit and I have to appear before you guys looking for money next year because we didn't budget this right. So it's about a half-half split. If you go down the list, rather than me talk through every one of these, does anyone have a particular question about a particular? I have notes for every one of those changes in FTEs if you want to go over those.
Denny, go ahead.
I guess maybe go the opposite way. Are there, the FTEs that are new that aren't coming from, that are new positions? I would say, how many? Are those the ones that you've laid out in your plan there? So everything else is just money that you're putting back into the operating budget that would normally have come from a revolving account. Is that
correct? That's exactly right.
There's no other surprises in here.
No.
Anyway.
No.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Marcus, your hand up for this or for the next one?
Well, since you asked, I do have a question. So for the classroom teachers, this 1.5 million, that's part of the collective bargaining, the annual raise, plus some additional positions.
Correct.
Thank you.
On those classroom teachers, is the increase in positions, is some of that because the full day kindergarten is no longer going to be able to fund part of that?
That's correct too. Yep.
Alrighty, because I know we said we weren't increasing positions, we were moving things out of revolver. So I was just confirming that was one of the items there. Okay.
Yeah. So just to clarify with kindergarten how it works is about, let's call it about 400,000. I know it says 450 on the comprehensive. but roughly 400,000 of teacher salaries. Let's call it 4 teachers, just to simplify it, that are in our revolving account that need to move back into the operating budget in order to allow us to not have to charge for full day K, right? Because now it's captured in the operating budget. So with each 100,000 we move in, we're moving 1 teacher back into the operating budget. So
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Yep. Okay. Brian.
Through you, Mark. Mike, for say the custodians, use that as an example. I see last year was 13.3 and going up to 15.3. Now, did you have to lay people off there, or did people just work less hours and you still had the same amount of custodians and now you're going to be back up to full time?
So that's the exact situation I was talking about, the revolving account. So I traditionally had paid 6 custodians out of the extended day program alone. 2 of those I had to move back into the operating budget to cover them. So there's a shifting of, and custodians is an easy one to do. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's justifiable when you move them back and forth. So that's an example of revenue shortfall in revolvings has to go back into the operating budget to make sure that you have it. Now, that's not to say that next year we do well, and as the year goes along, the revenue bumps up, I can move those people back out and free up money if I needed to. So that's what I mean by reserve. I don't have a traditional reserve, but I'm able to utilize these accounts to help avoid coming to you guys for needs that we didn't anticipate or just came up out of for whatever reason.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let's see, Lucy.
Can you explain what a job coach is? Line 27. I might have missed it, but it just looks like it went significantly up, and I just don't know what that position is.
Bridget, I think that's the middle school. Actually, that would be the high school.
That, what number is it, Mike?
It's line 27. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's the middle school transition coach.
What does that position entail?
That's the one that we described for the new position. So students, it would be shared between the Vernon Johnson Middle School, and that's the one for students coming back from mental health needs, concussions, making sure that they have the support necessary in order to make sure that they don't have gaps, or to make sure that they're not going out for extended periods of time.
So we're adding another, so there's 2 now instead of 1. Is that what we're doing?
No, we don't have one at the middle school. We only have one at the high school.
The high school. Okay, I got it. All right, thank you.
Josette?
Mike, basically, you're between a rock and a hard place.
It's a really difficult year, Josette. You nailed it right on the head.
It really is. And, you're an honest person, and I respect that. And I've known you for quite a few years being on the committee. Hypothetically, and what do you think before things level off to whatever the normalcy will be as far as your accounting? Are you looking at maybe a year, maybe 2 years?
I think next year is going to be a wild card in a lot of ways, and that's obviously what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that 2 years from now it'll look more like how we've traditionally budgeted, where there's a level of certainty within these revolving accounts where people's lives settle down and they go back to their traditional patterns of, I go to work, my kids need care, my kids play sports because I can afford to have them play sports. The things that make funding predictable are critical. When you take that away, it's disarray, and I'm not gonna tell you that it's not manageable. Oh, it's manageable, but it's really been a very difficult 2 years, and we're going into the 3rd year. So I'm hopeful that 23 will look a lot more like what we're used to.
It's very challenging. Thank you.
Thank you.
Denny.
Sorry about that. So I hadn't thought about this earlier when we were talking, and now looking at these revolving accounts. You're anticipating in budgeting for being back in school and having a traditional school year for next year. So if everything returned to normal, who knows? You may actually have the income coming in for these accounts that you haven't budgeted for, or did you need to make the money this year to carry them? Is that the part that I'm missing?
So if I'm going to build a budget for next year, FY22, I need to have certainty about revenue in 21 because that's how I'm going to pay for it. I can't budget and hope that the revenue I need to pay for those positions becomes available. So
Okay.
it's a very good point you make that you just, and you'll see it in the town. You guys know when you meet with Jim Johnson and he talks about the town budget, there's certain things you just don't do, and that's make a leap of faith about future revenues.
I'm very glad to hear. Yeah, perfect. That's how you should be budget. But so you put a worst case scenario budget together, and hopefully it's not worse than this. If the vaccines get done, we start to go back to normalcy by September, and we start having fall sports. We have all of these programs, other things. Your revenue stream could be significantly better than you budgeted for.
Correct. And so what I would do at that point is as things settle down and it's predictable, like I've done in the past, I'll move those custodians back in to those revolving accounts. And when I come to you guys in the school committee, obviously not just me, but we come to you guys with a proposed budget, it would be minus those positions. Would you necessarily see a big minus? No, but if we looked at the FTE report, you'd see those positions going back out of operating into revolving. You'd say, oh, those are the positions you moved the other way last year. Yep. And that reduced the overall number that we're looking for from the town. And I've had those, you can make the argument it's one-time money. It's dependent on revenue from a program. But I've had those custodians in there for a long time, and we've been fortunate enough to add them more and more over the years.
Well, it's really not one-time money because it has, you've got it. It's just different revenue streams that you expect to generate, and it's the variables. Hey, if I'm selling product, I have a great year, but I budget off of my average sales line. So no, that's good. I just hadn't thought until we started getting into this. I hadn't thought about how we were planning for next year.
Yeah, I would just, Denny, just to correct, I wouldn't call it one-time money, but I would say it lacks the certainty of an appropriated budget, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit less than appropriation.
No, but it's how we mostly have to budget in outside of the government world. It's operating budgets off of sales and performance and up and down that vary off of, rather than coming from tax dollars. So, wonderful. Thank you.
Just real quick, on a lot of those programs, you don't even ask for commitments to those programs until the new fiscal year starts, correct?
Yeah, we try to get projections on participation, but you're right, there are no obligations financially. Maybe a deposit to hold a spot for a child, but you wouldn't ask for a whole year's worth of revenue up front.
Right, but the only one that people actually do usually put money forward is the parking at the high school. But these other programs, it's you usually find out 3 or 4 weeks before the program begins that you've got an enrollment in the program.
And that's the challenge, Mark. That's a challenge with next year. We just don't know. Nobody knows.
Yeah, people aren't going to make a decision about extended day until middle of August when school's right around the corner, and they look at their work situation and saying, yeah, the kid's got to come home or the kid's got to stay after school.
Exactly.
Okay.
Are you noticing any decrease in the school population? Like going to private schools?
You know what, Joe, not much for the private, our homeschooling increased our numbers. I think we had, I'm looking to see if I can find the numbers for you, but we did have an increase in the students that are homeschooled this year, but I anticipate that those students will return.
Once things level off and.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, once they level off.
Thank you.
Great.
We have, I'm sorry, we had 18 last year and we have 34 this year.
God bless the parents.
Other questions on the personnel schedule? Okay, we'll move on.
All right, Mark, so now we're up to the comprehensive budget, which we talk about every year. I think it'll be some redundancy based on the fact we just went over the FTE report, at least on the personnel side. But looking at the comprehensive budget, you've got your three columns, your actual expenditures, your budgeted FY21, and then your requests for FY22. And these categories are divided into the local appropriation, which is at the top, which is what we've been spending a lot of time talking about. Reimbursements, which we really haven't talked about, which we can in a minute. Offsets, tuitions, and the programs we were just talking about. And then at the bottom is our grants, and I added a few grants toward the bottom that are new that we added on. And then I think it was Mark or somebody, I think Mark brought it up, the total budget at the bottom line is $54,716,975. That's the total actual budget request that we're making. That's what the total expenditure would be if the appropriated budget is approved. So just going back up to the top, you'll see some of these numbers should look familiar at this point. You've got a personnel request for FY22 of $41,140,098. You add in the $736,000 and the $530,000 for the new positions and obviously the one-time money. That gets you to an adjusted personnel budget of $42,406,098. And then we have our goods and service portion of our budget, which is the $6,958,842, which we did talk about with regards to special ed and the reductions that they were able to make this year. And that gives you the $49,356,940 budget as compared to, and this is going to be a little off because remember I was saying tonight Jim's number changed a little bit, about 13,000 to the better. So it gives us a budget gap of Bridget, do you still have that up?
308.
Yeah, 308, thank you. Which includes Jim's revised number. Any questions on the top portion? Because I'm going to just move on to the reimbursements if there are none. Okay. So going on to circuit breaker, that's the funding that we get related to special ed. It came in, or it's coming in $1,745,540, which is pretty much on target for this year's budget. And we're looking at a slight reduction in circuit breaker for next year of about $10,686. If circuit breaker goes down, the appropriated budget goes up to offset that. But in the overall scheme of a almost $50 million budget, $10,000 isn't a lot. So that's pretty good news. The next line, special ed tuition in. We've been able to tuition in a student from another town. They pay for the student to attend our programs, and we were able to collect $35,000. That went away last year, and maybe another student may move in next year, but we'll have to see. But at this point, there's no indication of revenue from that source. The Medicaid reimbursement, I think you guys remember this was a big topic last year. Talked about replacing that revenue. The actual revenue hit was a little larger than what we thought going into next year. So we're reducing it down to $250,000, which is a $34,000, $34,667 reduction from what we budgeted from this year. So again, the federal government, they're making it more challenging to collect revenue based on medical services provided. There's not a lot we can do other than just do the best we can at this point. McKinney-Vento, basically the status, our homeless population. I don't believe, John, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's moved up much since last year.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. And that gives us $1,996,800 for the reimbursement portion of our budget, or for the reimbursement portion. We talked about the tuitions and fees offset. I want to highlight the transportation because this is a problem this year, pretty significant problem. So in 20, we budgeted 360,000 to collect. So what I'm doing is I'm projecting what we think we'll collect from riders of the buses. That money, I deflate the transportation cost of the contract by the amount of money we can collect. So the appropriation goes down with the amount of money we collect. Well, as you can see here, where am I? Transportation this year, instead of, I budgeted 360, or we collected actually 360 in FY20. I was actually projecting we would collect 380 this year because the bus fee went up slightly. But I hope you can see what we actually collected, 59,827. So you can see that we took a very substantial hit on our budget. And actually, I have to revise, we're about 321,000 in the deficit as compared to what we budgeted. So we've held back our goods and service budget. 25% of all our goods and service budgets this year have been held back. And I plan to use that money, which is about 221,000 coincidentally, of that money would go to plug that hole of that missing revenue. And then we're still left with a $100,000 gap. So I'll have to figure out how to cover that as well. And that'll probably be using some revolvings or some other means to cover that. I don't anticipate I'll have to come to you guys for that money. But that is one of the most substantial hits to our budget this year. Just going down the list, I'm just going to highlight the ones that really jump out. Extended day, you can see I reduced the fees by 25,000. Denny, that might be understating what it really comes in at, but I'm willing to take that, slight chance there. Parking, we did okay with because we wound up selling to both cohort A and cohort B the spots, and it kind of evened out. So I think we'll be okay there. So overall, it's a challenge in the offset for fees and tuitions. Okay. Going down to the grants, we were able to add some grants into our budget that were not there before, and those have been placed at the bottom of the list, down at the bottom. So grants, we always level fund because we just don't know at this point in the year what to expect for grant funding. But no indications to the negative, no indications to the positive at this point. So the increase for our overall budget would be that $2,695,762. Happy to answer any questions.
Allie's hand is up first.
I have a quick question about transportation. Obviously, we took a big hit this year. Is there any way to offer mid-year? I mean, as parents get more comfortable, can we get more kids on the buses safely and do a mid-year transportation fee that is fair? I mean, I've seen the buses go in, there's very few students. I understand the reasons. I think people need to understand parents have paid, so it's not just the town wasting money on transportation as may be thought, but as parents sit in the long lines of traffic to pick up, maybe some are willing to get back on the bus.
So it's a good question. Again, I'll thank the town, for all the parents in the town who decided to drive their kids just to help free up those buses initially for the parents who couldn't do anything other than have their children ride the buses. We do prorate the fee. The CDC and DESE just removed the guidance on the buses for capacity. So we could theoretically fill our buses. And the theory there is that ventilation, for those of you watching CDC guidance, ventilation is the key. Obviously masks and ventilation. So buses driving with the windows open brings in enough fresh air and circulates air at such a extreme rate that they don't feel that that is really an area of transmission. So they've removed the capacity. We have accepted everyone who's needed to come back on the buses at this point at a relatively safe distance with the masks, and we haven't had any problems on any buses really for that reason. I guess to answer your question, Allie, if there were a demand now to have ridership go up, if we were trying to bring back more kids, we could provide bus transportation, and we do prorate the fee for those who want to ride the buses.
I just think it's probably something that parents in Walpole don't know, that that's really even a possibility. And I think some parents at this point may feel a little bit more comfortable with letting their kids be on the bus, and they're tired of waiting in long, long lines for pickup. My kids are walkers, so.
Thanks, Ally, for bringing that, because we will be sending a survey home for parents in case, depending on the Board of Ed vote, hopefully within the next week. And it's a good idea. We're going to we can add Mike to that list too, to say, if, would you like to bring your child back on the bus? Because we're going to have to do routes anyways. Mike's going to have fun.
I know logistically it's a little bit of a nightmare, but I mean, if that's a significant revenue loss, I think there's parents who are willing to move forward, especially while we have the kindergarten, first and second grade in 4 days a week. Once or twice a week picking up and doing the long lines, but now if you're doing it 4 days a week, I'm sure there's parents that are not having fun with it.
Correct.
Yep.
Good point.
Real quick on that. So with the states change, you're not bringing the kids back in 4 days a week, all kids, or are you still rotating the cohorts?
Right now we have K1 and 2 back, and it's a capacity issue right now. So we have to wait for the commissioner and the Board of Ed, the vote on the Board of Ed. And if the vote goes through, then he's looking at, we'll make sure to follow his directive. And if we're able to get kids back, we'll be ready.
Okay. Let's see. Doug, then Mark, then Jeff.
Thanks. I guess if I could just ask my first question on that, bringing kids back. If, we are allowed to go back full time, are you going to give parents who aren't comfortable sending their kids back the option to enroll in the full virtual?
Yes, they will have the option to do that and stay with that option for the remainder of the year.
And then my other question is on the FY21 extended day revenue for $100,000, the offset. You had mentioned that the enrollment is down by 80%. So I'm wondering if that $100,000 number, how good that is at this point in the fiscal year. Is that where we are, or is that going to be another hole?
So we've cut staffing. Unfortunately, we've had to lay off staff as we've realized that the numbers are going to come down, are going to stay down. We're moving upward only because of the management of that remote day program that we had going for a while, which is now moved into Elm Street. So we've made moves to shore up our program. I don't know if we're going to hit the 100,000 exactly, Doug, but I think we're not going to have a hole. I can tell you that. I won't be moving any more staff into the operating budget. So fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ready? Mark?
If you could just help me to understand. So the town budget 102.5. So when I'm looking at this sheet, we're at, again, the 49.4. Then it takes me up to the 54. So what is in the town's 102.5? Is it the 49 or is it the 54?
49.
So I guess the top section A, all that budgeting up at the top is all town appropriated dollars. So, I mean, that's all the revenue associated with the appropriated budget. Down below is just the all in. I don't know if I'm answering your question though.
Right. Okay. So for your budget, your whole budget is the 54.7 million.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's all my budget, but it's what we spend as a total.
Right. So you'll spend 54.7. The town gives you the 49.4 and these grants. What happens if these grants don't come in and they're off budget? Does the town give you one-time money to make up the difference, or do you not spend and you spend to what the grant amounts are?
I would say, I'll preface this, in non-COVID times, that there's a pretty good level of certainty that the grants aren't going to drop off a cliff. They do fluctuate, and we account for that, and we have to figure out, in some cases, it may be the appropriated budget. That's where somebody goes, and I have to find a means to pay them through that but it is accounted for, and we can, within reason, count on those grants being level funded. I'll give you an example, if we go back up to the Medicaid issue that we talked about last year, that was the federal government, right? That's kind of like a grant. They're giving reimbursement for medical services we provide. We got indications that was going to drop off, and we were able to be proactive with it. So it's not very common that you see a precipitous decline in grant funding that would cause us to have to fund it in the appropriated budget without notice.
Okay. With the FTEs that you want to bring on board this year, is this it? Next year, could we expect to see an additional number of employees that you would want to hire?
Bridget, you want to answer that, or Nancy?
Sure. I would say very likely there could be something, Mark. I think we're trying to address what we see right now. I think we always try to move around existing existing staff to meet a need if some need comes along. But yeah, I would say it's definitely possible that we would be looking for something additional next year.
Okay. Thank you. So Mark, just in general for the Finance Committee, my concern is this. When we look at the schools and public safety, it's roughly about $62 million. So they're about 62% of the town's total budget, approximately. And this year, we're seeing increases being asked between 5 and 7%. Fortunately, the revenues, Jim has estimated about 4.5%. So the gap isn't too big. But what happens is when the 102.5 can only grow the 2.5% on the tax levy, and then whatever increase we get in the fees, that's it. And my concern is that the schools, the town, the public safety, both fire and police, everyone's catching up. And they continue to increase their budgets above what the town general revenue increase is. And so next year, there'll be maybe 65% of the budget. And they end up squeezing out the other town departments because that 102 revenue increase doesn't keep track with the 5% that the school, and I don't disagree that the school needs the increases and the fire and the police as well. But again, just from the committee standpoint, my concern is that we keep getting hit with substantial increases in these three departments, and they're 60 some odd % of the total budget. And if we don't somehow put in a mechanism that keeps them within line of the town's total revenue increases each year, eventually we're going to have to be facing with layoffs or you kind of rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's my concern with the three budgets that we've gone over the last 2 days.
It's legitimate.
Yeah. Brian, did you have your hand up and then take it down, or you still got a question?
No, I'm all set.
That's it. Okay, then Andrew.
Yes. Hi. I respect what Mark Sullivan just said, but I want to offer a different perspective and push back on that because for two reasons. One, these budget increases, yes, they're catch-ups because last year we had really level-funded kind of bare essential budgets, 1-2% increases, both police and fire and the schools. But the other thing is that municipal budgeting, as Jim Johnson and we all know, is really kind of a moving target because a lot of our revenue estimates from last fiscal year, that were done last year for this current fiscal year have exploded to the upside. So let's just think through on local receipts, building permits, new growth, the unemployment fund, state aid. We budgeted a 10% decrease. That is all surprise to the upside. And if things are on track as they are now with vaccine rollouts, there are going to be surprises to the upside again for this next fiscal year. So I totally get, me and Mark are in agreement that like we see the needs, especially for the schools, given what the kids have gone through and the teachers and staff, but also for the police and fire, the needs for these 4, 5 to 7% increases. But what we have to kind of realize is that we've kind of, for months now, and I've been a part of this, we've said, okay, let's batten down the hatches. Let's kind of weather this storm because there's high levels of uncertainty. But now that the daylight is starting to come out of it, when we see these local receipt numbers come in, when we see the state revenues come in, and they're surprising everyone to the upside, I think that these increases are perfectly legitimate.
No other hands are raised at this point. Is there anybody who's got specific questions on any individual tab within the school budget, either with regards to an individual school and their budget, or overall supplies and so forth, or special ed? No other questions on Walpole School?
I have 2 quick questions, Mark.
Okay, I saw Brian's hand first, though. Brian, then
Yeah, through you, Mark. I just had a question on the Elm Street School electricity, and I'm assuming that it's because there's AC there. It was a drastic difference between every other school.
That would be the reason.
Sorry, Brian. Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Allie?
2 quick questions. One, in professional development amongst the schools, there's a range from about 6,200 to 3,200. Is that because of the number of staffing? But even within the 4 elementaries, I notice a difference.
You talking, oh, the PD that's allotted, Ally?
Yes.
Yeah, that continues to pay for, I know for the elementary, the Lucy Calkins, the literacy program. And I don't have my book, I can grab my book and pull it in front of me. And then also continue with math professional development. We've got social studies standards and science standards that also need to be met. And then also with the literacy is increasing the diversity of reading books throughout the elementary schools.
Well, I know in the past, I think Elms or maybe Fisher had tried a program. I just noticed there's a discrepancy. I think Elm Street was at like 6,200 and say Boyd and OPR were at 3,200. And so I didn't know if a school was trying out a new curriculum program first. And I know sometimes that is the case.
Yeah, you know what that might be? That might be the ST math. Because it was that right, Mike? Because it was, they were able to get, one group was able to get a grant, and then after that you absorb it. But that's that ST math program.
Okay. We use that often in practice.
Jump on.
The other quick question I had, we talked about students who are leaving the schools, Tri-County and other kind of collaborative type of schools. I've heard that there's an increase of students, say, going to Tri-County. Do we know what type of programs they're studying or seeking? It may not be data that we can kind of get that information, but I'm just curious. And I can appreciate students wanting to get some hands-on learning, and maybe the typical academic schooling is not for them, but do we have an idea of what students are looking at?
I'll take that one if you don't mind, Bridget. We're just beginning to look into that, Allie. We, have seen both Tri-County, and the other one that we're concerned about is charter schools, trying to understand why more students are leaving the district. Because when you look at charter schools, for example, our test scores almost always are better than theirs. So, what we need to understand better, what is the driver? And I know that when it comes to Tri-County, that maybe we need to market our high school more, or maybe we need to invest in it a little bit more. So we're in the process of looking into that, but we don't really have any definitive answers yet.
Okay, it's just a thought. And then my last question, as I looked over my notes, there's so much in the school budget. It does take a number of years of sitting on the board to really kind of understand what goes into it. Remote learning, I mean, I hope that we're all kind of back to a regular education situation next year. I know my children are too. If there's parents that are still not comfortable, are we going to still offer some type of remote learning for them? Is that within our budget?
Well, I hope so too. We're all back in person as soon as safely and as possible we could do so. It's all going to depend on the commissioner. You know, we have superintendents have usually twice a month meetings with the commissioner. And that's one of our questions that we've asked him regarding what learning would look like and where does remote learning stand on this. So I'll let you know when we get an answer.
That's all. That's it for me.
Okay. Jeff.
Get off the mute button. Thanks. Mark, I just wanted to talk about line 32, transportation, the 10% increase to 22. Is that a new contract or?
Sorry, Jeff. Yes, the contract goes up every year. There's a
10%?
Yeah, it's not 10%. No. Which line were you referring? Oh, within the
Goods and services, line 32.
All right. So I don't have my book in front of me. So it goes. I can tell you right now, it goes up consistently by approximately 2.5% to 3% a year. We have decreased the offsets to the contract are the bus fees, parking fees, the money that's collected for those. The anticipated revenue there has decreased to a bit, which would give you, I think, what you're looking at there, which is that increase.
Yeah, so you're looking at a net number when you're looking at the budget of 826,000. That's a net number. So the gross number probably went up 5%, but the anticipated revenue from the sources Mark outlined are anticipated on going down, as opposed to keeping pace with the cost increase.
That's correct. So it's a dual effect, right? The contract goes up and the revenues we count on go down, thereby multiplying the effect of to the negative.
All right, thanks. And Mark, through you, I just couldn't help but notice custodian supplies seems to be way down. Aren't we cleaning more?
We are cleaning more. We're doing a tremendous amount of disinfecting, cleaning, all the COVID protocols that we're doing this year. And a lot of that is being paid for from the COVID grant funding, which I was going to talk about next. So a lot of what I pay for building-wise, custodian-wise, such as the maintenance of their equipment, sometimes supplies, if they run low, comes from that building rental account. Unfortunately, the building rental account doesn't have the revenue it had. So, you've got to use the grant funding to supplant what we normally would have used from the building rental.
Okay, thanks. And then one more comment. Music supplies. We have, it's a small nominal amount of budget that is in every single school except the high school. There's no funding request for music supplies. Is the program losing?
Jeff, they have their own line item that set high school under, I believe it's the central in Bill Hahn's budget with curriculum.
Okay.
I'll find it.
It is. That's true. And they pay for a fair amount of their things at the high school from that central account because their budget is a lot larger and their needs are more significant than the other schools. And that's where they're pulling their money from. So if you look under central, you'll see that.
All right. Yep. I got it. Like Allie said, it takes a while some years of experience. So I'm getting there.
No, it's a good question. It's line item, budget item 109.
All right. And I know there was a lot of conversation about, ridership on transportation. I just wanted to say, my boys have been on the bus since day one, and we've been extremely fortunate that, they've been on there, never deemed a close contact through it. And, the protocols put in place. And they've done a great job. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Other questions before we move on? Okay. Next item.
Okay. We ready to move on? I will cover the COVID funding. I know it took a while, Gisette, but we're at that point now. All right. So I'm trying to summarize this. This is one of the most challenging things we're dealing with this year. It's a good thing because it's a lot of revenue coming in to offset a lot of expenses we had to incur, but it's just a lot to digest. So let me give you 5 or 6 bullet points and see where we go from there. So there are 6 primary grants that the school department can access this year. The grant funding accessible to the school department totals approximately $2,775,000. The total funding allocated so far is $690,000 for payroll and $1,470,000 for expenses. So that's what we've used of the $2,775,000 so far this year. The remaining balance is about $616,000. And the only reason that's remaining is because these grants just, for lack of better terms, keep coming in, and you'll get the DESE will form a conference call. We all get on the conference call. We listen to the rationale for the grant, the rationale for the size of the grant, and then we just process it as best we can. We write off payroll expenses. We write off material things such as disinfectants and sprayers and all the masks and all the PPE we've bought. So that's the funding amounts. Funds may only be utilized for COVID-related expenses, and the time periods are unique to each grant, i.e. the ESSER grant, which is one of them, one of the grants that we have funding for, has up till 2023 to be expended. So they give you amounts, they tell you what you can use it for, they give you windows of time depending on which grants, that you've got to just kind of play along and figure it out. So it's, my association, MASBO, the Superintendent's Association, all provide the best guidance they can, but it's really a challenging thing to manage the grants and offset these huge expenses that we've had to address at this point. So I think I'd be happy to answer any questions the best I can for anyone.
I have a question with the grants. So you're using this to offset some expenses. So are those expenses then deducted from your budget?
Those expenses in most cases were not budgeted for. Okay. So I'll give you an example. That remote learning program we talked about earlier that Bill Hahn was overseeing for the students who don't want, the families don't want to send their kids into school so they can go remote. None of that was budgeted for. It was put upon us to create. We created it with no budget in anticipation that the government, federal government or state, was going to have to fund this because everyone's in the same boat. And so I wouldn't even call it a leap of faith. I mean, it was just a mandate, and then the funding was due to come. And that's kind of the way this is played out. We are still about 200 short of what we need to be flat, right? So all the revenue coming in offsets all the expenses if we get 200,000 more. And we are waiting from this latest 1.9 trillion, some relief for school departments to hopefully flatten out that last piece.
Do you have any concerns that you will have these, out of scope costs and you won't get the funding and you'll need to come back and have it covered separately?
Not at this point. They've been pretty liberal with what they will accept within the grant funding, and the dollar amounts are of the magnitude we need to support what we're doing, minus the 200 I was just saying at this point. If the projections for this latest round, the 1.9 trillion package, comes in anywhere near what we're projecting, we'll be over. We'll have excess funding at that point, and then we'll have to decide what to do. But keeping in mind that it's all one-time money, you know, you can't do anything long-term with it, and that it can only be expended on COVID-related items.
Right, okay. Great, thank you.
So you basically are doing more or less 2 sets of books. One that is exclusively COVID directed and the expenses that are there in addition to your everyday work.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, in that budgeted versus unbudgeted in its simplest form. Mandates unfunded until they're funded, right? In this case, at least the federal government standing behind what they're saying they're going to require us to do so far, right? And so if we get that final piece in, we'll be okay. We'll be flat, and all this extraneous PPE, cleaning protocols, overtime involved with that, air purifiers, ventilation retrofits, and then all the staffing levels. I mean, there's just millions of dollars of expenditures that nobody anticipated, but we're close, and that's why I'm optimistic. To Mark's question, I don't anticipate that we'll be out money at the end of the year.
That's a good feeling when you're dealing with the government for a change.
That's true.
Other questions on COVID expenses and relief? Don't see any hands. Oh, okay, Lisa.
I just can't find the relevant information in my many packets about COVID-related grants and relief. It must be here somewhere.
It's a good question. It's not. It's because it's constantly evolving that I didn't include it in the packet, because we just got grants in within the last week or so. So I can provide you guys with the information that I gave you. Actually, I have a spreadsheet right here. I'm not making it up. It has all the grant information. Why don't I just say, I'll send it to you guys tomorrow as a separate email.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy?
I have a couple of other pieces of information that I wanted to add into the mix, so I just wanted to alert you to that, Mark, but I don't want to shut off the questions if there are other questions.
Okay, we'll go to Kathleen first, and then we'll come back to you. Thanks.
I guess this goes under the category of Hope Springs Eternal. Through you, Mark, I'm wondering if anybody can comment on, have there been any investments through these COVID funds that will change things going forward? In other words, I know we spent a lot on masks and cleaning things that go away that were consumable, but are we in a better position now in some optimistic way because of COVID funds?
So great question, and absolutely yes. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's an opportunity to talk about the positives of this pandemic. So due to the investments we made through the Capitol and through Finance Committee in the past, we were in a pretty good position with Chromebooks and doing some remote learning, nowhere near what we're doing right now. But we were in a pretty well position as compared to other schools that nobody had Chromebooks, and one-to-one was so far off. We are now fully one-to-one. And when we finally get our last round in, which we're still waiting on, we'll actually be able to replace a lot of the older devices. So we will have a very modern, updated one-to-one device for every student that needs a device in this district. Additionally, projectors were provided, and now there's rationale here that, you know, you'd probably say, well, why would COVID pay for projectors? Well, we can talk about the rationale down the road, but we were able to get new projectors in many of our buildings covered by COVID relief. We're able to finish wireless work within the buildings. We actually have several buildings that have external wireless, so when we return in the spring, they can do classrooms outside, remote outside, and have wireless access for the middle schools and the high school, so you can do full-blown lessons out there. Our infrastructure, we added a new broadband line coming in as additional broadband that we needed to support this, but is now permanently in place. And so all this kind of technology that's been introduced to our students in our schools and our teachers, by the way, all of our teachers got brand new Chromebooks. all is via COVID relief funding. So there is a very positive aspect to this story. It didn't come easy, but the benefits are tremendous. So great question. Thank you.
Anything else, Kathleen? You're good? Okay. Don't see any other hands raised, so we'll go back to Nancy.
Thank you, Mark. A couple of things. First of all, I think that when we have been to finance committee meetings in the past, we've talked about how complicated our budget is and how there are a number of moving parts. And we're usually talking about things like move-ins in special ed and things that now seem so minor compared to all the balls that the administration has had to juggle this year. It's been an incredible year, and you know, Mike and all of them, they're very, very aware of the responsibility, as are the school committee members too. Don't get me wrong, the responsibility related to making the best use out of other people's money, and you know, the questions that you guys have are the ones that used to keep some of us on school committee up at night, because you know, you'd think, oh, he couldn't have thought of this, or maybe they wouldn't have thought of that. But thankfully we have just an unbelievable amount of resource and energy in our administrators. I mean, I'm sure Mike didn't sleep great this weekend, nor did Bridget, anticipating coming to this meeting because they want to be well prepared. But, you know, you guys came out with questions from every single angle, and they're 600% legit, because it's important to be able to understand the differences. And this year has been a crazy one. I want to get back to the conversation about that. In my heart of hearts, I believe that this is a legitimate request. I think that there are potential positive revenue sources that we talked about tonight. You know, if things get back to normal and we're able to get the food service program operating as it did, we may be able to realize some positive savings at that point. The federal government is talking about money that could be targeted towards cities and towns as well as the state. I think that the point that was made about the budget has to grow in responsible ways so that the other departments don't get elbowed out is an important one. And I think it's an important one for all of us in the school department and the administration and the school committee to realize that it is not responsible to be asking for large percentage increases this year. I just feel like this year is it's a 2-year increase built into one request. So I hope you would take that seriously. I did put together a little bit of information for tonight about comparisons to other towns, and I know that was requested a little bit earlier. I think, Bridget, you have the slides?
Yep, it's up, Nancy.
Okay, so this is something that you have seen before, but you know, we look each year at our per pupil expenditure, our average teacher salary, but we also look at how much money the taxpayers of Walpole are contributing and how much money the state is contributing. And I don't know whether this information was in their packets or not, Bridget. If not,
but we'll email it to them.
I was going to say, if not, we'll send it to you. The information comes from the Department of Revenue or from the Department of Education. Most of it comes from the Department of Education. And the most recently posted information is about the FY19 school year. So it's a little bit outdated. But of the 17 towns that we compare ourselves to pretty regularly, and the 18th being the state, our per pupil expenditure is on the low side. Our average teacher salary is on the very low side. Well, I shouldn't say that. Of the towns that are represented here, Walpole is 16th out of 18 in terms of average teacher salary. And the reason I point those out is because I think that people do have an expectation that we offer a service that competes academically with the towns on this list. And I think it just legitimizes the fact that it would be great if we can afford it as a town to make this investment that we're asking for tonight. It won't make up all of these gaps, and we understand that when you go over to the average single family tax bill, Walpole is right in the middle of this group in terms of what we pay in our taxes. We're ninth out of 17 towns there. And I know this is a little bit frustrating because you can't see the whole slide, which is fine. We'll send it to you. But my point is, we can't expect to be at the top of this list because Walpole relies much more on residential taxes than a lot of these other towns do. And the average single family tax bill is just one indicator. But if a town like Norwood has a lower residential bill, but more commercial revenue, that justifies why they can spend more on their schools than we do. So we understand the whole picture, and we are very, very aware of being responsible with our spending. But I think it's always good to take a couple of steps back and look at the big picture. The second slide is one that talks just about average teacher salary. And again, the way you read this slide is the Concord Carlisle on the top left is the town in Massachusetts that spent the most on average teacher salary in FY19. And then you go down, Boston is second, Carlisle is third. So you go down the first column, and then when you get to the bottom, you go to column B, and you go down that column, and then you go down C, D, and Walpole is at the bottom of column E. I don't want to overblow this because the difference between Walpole and the towns right above it is minuscule. So I'm not saying these are big differences. There are small differences. There are big differences if you compare column E to column A. But the reason I think that this is important is because we've talked a lot tonight about the additional amount of money that we're requesting. We look really carefully also to understand are we spending the money that we have today responsibly? And in order to get the academic results that we want, we definitely do need to invest in our teachers, yet we have to work within responsible budgeting. As somebody asked earlier, we will be going into year 3 of a 3-year contract next year. The contract that we negotiated had a 1.5% COLA the first year, a 1.5% COLA the second year, and a 1.75% COLA the third year. We felt that was what we could afford to give, and yet we're not competing. Well, we're not overspending is a better way of saying it when it comes to what we're paying our staff. And that represents the largest portion of our budget. So I just wanted to mention that because teacher salary is the biggest driver. and we've got some amazing teachers. We have done a lot of investing in our teachers. We want to keep them in our school district, and we need to also evaluate ourselves in terms of, are we staying where we need to be when it comes to teacher salary? So I hope that this helps you to see that we take our responsibility tremendously seriously. We feel that this is a legitimate request, and we're fairly close to being able to accomplish this. We hope that between working from our end and working from your end, that we can make some room towards accomplishing this, because we know that it's been a tough year. It's been a tough year on families. It's been a tough year on kids, and we'd like to try to make the most of the next school year. So I guess that's it.
I just saw Denny's hand go up. Denny?
Yeah, I just want to make sure on the budget ask, from the town funds, we're asking for the 49,048,755, which is what
It's Jim's recommendation.
Jim's recommendation. We're on that one, right, Mike?
Yep.
Okay.
The school committee is looking for another 308 if we can swing it.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Understand.
Yes.
Just want to make sure I know what when we're getting ready to vote later. There's no confusion. So
Okay. Alrighty. Brian?
hopefully sooner rather than later on that vote at 9:30 at night.
Yeah. Brian?
Through you, Mark. Nancy, that information was invaluable and kind of what I was asking for earlier. So if we could get that information, it would be very helpful. You mentioned something there where our teachers are compared to other teachers. And do school districts measure the tenure of teachers? And do we have a high turnover compared to other towns? Seeing where we fall on that chart.
That's a good question, Brian. I don't know. I am a sort of data geek, and so far I haven't found that out about tenure. I know that I like looking at this kind of data, but it really is just a snapshot, and it doesn't tell the whole story. For example, if our enrollment has declined a bit and the town next door's enrollment has increased, suppose we have the same budgets, all of a sudden our per pupil expenditure is going to look like there's more of a difference. And it would benefit us if we had fewer students, because we'd be dividing by a smaller number. So you can't get too granular on this kind of data, but it comes up whenever we negotiate, and I think that we have a responsibility to look at our contract and make sure that it's fair. I wonder that about whether our turnover is a little bit higher, although I like the demographics of our teaching staff right now. I think some of the brand new young people have brought some great things into the district, especially this year because of their comfort with technology. So, but that is a possibility. That definitely is a possibility. Yep.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Hi, I know it's late and we're all tempted to just do what we normally do, which is to take the town administrator's budget recommendation and vote it. And that's not what I want to do. I think this $308,000 difference needs to be closed, and our kids and their future, given what they've gone through the last year, really justifies it. And so there's one of two ways we can go forward. We can make the motion for the school committee's request, the $308,000, and work with Jim going forward to raise local receipt projections, raise whether it's hotel tax, meals tax. We could try to change new growth estimates. We could even, and I think that unusual circumstances justify it, we could use one-time money, free cash, even stabilization. What I don't want to do is to just routinely vote the recommendation and say, oh, that $308,000 gap. Well, you look at this list, you school committee, look at this list and say, let's not have an elementary school counselor or a middle school transition coach. In a year of incredible challenges, I don't want to give our kids short shrift. And so whatever we do tonight, I hope we at least work with the town administrator to bridge that $308,000 and give the school committee what they're asking for.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Jim, I know you're going to want
Yeah, I have some comments for sure, definitely on that one.
So real quick, before we get to that, what have you heard from the State House in their budget negotiations? Are we looking at any kind of bump over what you're currently projecting, or?
I have no further projections for you. The numbers I have for you, honestly, the numbers, that's all I have. I am not comfortable at all raising those numbers. I wasn't even completely comfortable putting those numbers in because they didn't factor in any potential cuts. You know, I had select board members who asked me to go with whatever the state went with. So I did. I am definitely not comfortable with pushing any of those numbers. If you're going to take some from somewhere, I suggest you take from a town budget or some other location. I don't feel comfortable bumping local receipts up. Everything I have in there, we have examined and looked at. This is the highest increase the school department budget has increased since the override. If you look at the stats there, I'm just not comfortable pushing those numbers any further. And if you want to take it from somewhere, let's start cutting the police and fire budgets because that's the place that I can cut.
Okay. Andrew, before I go to you, I'm just going to put this out there. We can table this and do some additional research on our budgets that exist. We can do a more thorough review of our projected revenue, or we can vote favorable action on what the town administrator has presented to us. I'm going to leave that up to whoever wants to put in a motion.
I'm going to put in a motion for favorable action for the amount of
$49,048,775, which is
well, you also got to cover Tri-County and Norfolk, so it's 50 million.
Well, I was going to.
You want to just do?
Going to do each one independently.
So yeah, I'll put in the motion for the 49,048,775.
Okay. I have a motion by Denny. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Doug. Okay. Any further discussion? I see Andrew and Lisa.
Yeah. So if we want to start from the town budget, I would start in the unemployment insurance line. We talked about how we have a $280,000. We budgeted $350,000 for this current fiscal year. We've only used $70,000. We have $280,000, and we're budgeting another $350,000 for next year. So either some combination of using free cash, given the expected $280, a large amount of that is going to roll over, or reducing the $350 for next year to bridge the $308. That's my top choice.
Okay. What did I say was next? Oh, Lisa, yes, and then
you got Josette.
Yep. Lisa, you're up.
I feel that Andrew's raised a very interesting point about our commitment to our students. I think it's disrespectful to rush through a vote because we're tired without spending some serious time thinking about whether that money could be squeezed out of other budgets. I certainly take Jim's advice that possibly the public safety budget would have that money in it somewhere. So I think I'm not ready to vote tonight on this.
Okay. Josette?
I agree with her. Given the hour and the complexity of the decisions to be made, I think that we're better off coming back on Thursday and addressing it at that time when everybody has had the opportunity to regurgitate all of this information and make a better informed decision. And I honestly believe that there is full credit to what Jim has said. I'm not voting one way or another, but I take a little exception to Andrew's comments about almost rubber stamping everything Jim does. I didn't appreciate that.
I do have a motion that was Proffered and seconded. Denny, do you want to withdraw your motion at this point? No? Okay. Brian, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm not ready to move forward at all tonight. There was a lot of information that was shared. That last info that Nancy shared with us, I want to see that and have it in my hand and digest that before I can move forward with any vote.
Okay.
Mark, can I ask a procedural question?
I was just going to get to procedure.
Okay.
So where we have a motion that was put forward and seconded, we will have to vote it. We do not have to vote favorable action. If we do not vote favorable action, then the motion does not carry, and we can revisit the topic at a later date for a substitute motion, or we can submit the original motion again. I do not think that this Thursday would be adequate enough time if we're looking to find savings from other budgets. So therefore, I would not put it on this Thursday's agenda. Next Monday is booked. The following Monday is booked. Jim, do you have a preference as to timeline so that people can look at things?
Nope, none whatsoever. I'll just make sure that you have all the school personnel, and you got to tell me what departments you want here also.
Okay. Bridget, what nights are not good for you? We generally meet Mondays and Thursdays. I know you sometimes have Thursday meetings.
Some Thursdays we have school committees, so it would be, if it's opposite of school committee.
It wouldn't happen. Okay.
The
Alrighty.
11th is bad for us. The 11th, and I want to say the 25th, are school committee meetings.
Okay.
But nothing on the 18th.
Nothing on the 18th. Okay. So let's move all three education budgets to Thursday the 18th. Actually, I got to go through Denny's motion first and see if it passes or not. Okay. I'm going to close discussion in favor of, a vote in favor of Denny's motion would be to support the town administrator's line. A vote against means that we could revisit the article with additional modifications going forward. Denny? Yes or no? Denny, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Josette?
No.
Allie?
No.
Andrew?
No.
Steve?
No.
Susan?
No.
Jeff?
Oh, boy.
Jeff?
No.
Kathleen, you need to abstain.
Abstain.
Yep. Lucy?
No.
Brian?
No.
Doug?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Lisa?
No.
Myself is a no. 1, 2, 3, 11, 0. The motion does not carry. We will add it to our agenda of March 18th.
I think I'm a 1 on there at the end, aren't I?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the abstain is not on.
Oh, sorry. That's right. 3, 10, 1. Sorry. Okay. Yes, so we're going to move it to March 18th along with the other two education budgets. Given the hour, I'm not going to review minutes that we have in front of us. We will pick them up at a later date. Thank you, school department, school committee members. Very good presentation. Thank you for your information. At this point, we have citizens petitions next Monday. Jim is still awaiting information from 2 of the petitioners and legal counsel. We hope to have that before the end of this week so that we can be well informed for Monday. At that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Denny, seconded by Susan. Alrighty. Denny?
Yes.
Yes. Josette?
Yes.
Allie?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Steve?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
And myself. Thank you. We stand adjourned until Monday. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.